Hello YouTube and welcome to the nation of free to play. I'm Mr. Mondstadt and today we got a new Spiral Abyss for the remaining version of Lunar 1 and the upcoming Lunar 2. In this video I will clear floor 12 with full stars and give you my F2P tips and tricks, plus the best strategies to help you do the same. Let's go! First up, let's have a look at the enemies. In the first chamber we get one small fontaine crab and one huge Nordcry crab, aka the local legend from the last Stygian onslaught. In the second half we get two fontaine mechs in two waves and lastly the Icewind Sweet Coppelius. In 12.2 we get the Frost Knight Hera from the current Stygian onslaught. For those who are not familiar with its mechanics yet, it is very interesting and allows for some creative team building, but I will talk about that in a bit. The second half is a familiar phase, the Mountain King. Very creative choice, I have really missed that one. And in 12.3 we get two members of the Wild Hunt, which is also a rather newish boss, but we will talk about its mechanics in detail as well. In the last chamber we got one Natlan Hunter Seeker, followed by the Primal Geovishap. Alright, what are the blessings? First side, bloom damage increased by 200 and lunar bloom damage increased by 75%. Second side, normal attack pyro damage increased by 75%. Yoimiya buff? No, never for the first side, and Arlecchino and Zhongli are rerunning, so that makes sense. Who should you play? If you have Nordcry units, the first side can really benefit from that. Ideally you play lunar-bloom with Lauma and or Nefer. This way all the bosses should be rather easy to clear. If you do not have Nordcry 5 stars, lunar-bloom or normal hyper-bloom are valid options as well. You should also be able to brute force it with Skirk, I believe. Only the crab's mechanics can be a bit annoying. Because of the crab, pyro is not recommended, but otherwise you will be able to get through these enemies with any meta team, I believe. For the second side, it is made for Arlecchino, however you can kinda play whatever. For the Mountain King, pyro is useful, and for the Geovishap I do recommend a shielder, but overall there are not too many restrictions. Mavuika will clear this for sure, both in Overload and Mallet. Varessa will as well. Skirk might have some issues with Coppelius because of its cry resistance, but you can try. Mualani should also be able to get through, but the multiple waves can be slightly annoying with her. With all of that said, let's have a closer look at every chamber. 12.1.1. I will ignore the small crab for now and only talk about the local legend. The battle-scarred rock crab works basically the same way it did in the last Stygian onslaught, but it will have significantly less HP than in Fearless. When the battle starts, it will fly up in the air and you cannot really hit it. The crab will create hermit seeds on field and you have to deal any type of bloom damage to 6 of them in order to get the crab back down. If you do not do that, it will deal big damage to your active character. After you got it down, the boss's res will be decreased by 40%. Now you can deal damage to it. However, it will keep creating these seeds and you can use them to defeat it faster. To do that, deal any form of bloom damage to it, so bloom, hyperbloom or lunar-bloom. Burgeon can work too, but is from my experience less effective against this boss. Outside of Burgeon, the seeds will then turn green and deal 500% of the bloom damage taken to the boss. In practice, this means that if you manage to deal a big chunk of bloom damage to multiple of these seeds, for example with Lauma's whole E, that might be enough to one-shot the crab. Again, the best units are Lauma and Nilou, but you can also mark multiple seeds with Nahida's skill. If you don't have her either, Dendro MC with lots of energy recharge and or Collei are decent F2P Dendro applicators as well. 12.1.2. Here the first two mechs are pretty straightforward. No shill, no special resistances, so just try to get rid of them as fast as you can. The Coppelius is a bit more interesting. It has increased cryo res, but if you have enough res shred you might still be able to make it work, even though I would not recommend it. After 30 seconds, or if the boss's HP reaches 71%, Coppelius will perform the climax. It will move to the center of the arena and summon 3 Frost Hearts. This will give him a cryo shield that you can either break with enough pyro or electro hits, or you can use Usia aligned damage to break the shield instantly. Also, after using 3 Usia attacks, the climax will end, so you can then deal as much damage as possible. Usia characters are Neviette, Clorin, Nadia, Lynette, Risley, Farina or Chevrus. Based on the elemental restrictions, I would recommend Chevrus and Clorin the most to make your life easier against this boss. However, you can also just break the shield the old-fashioned way. 12-1. Time to talk about the new boss, Frost Knight Hera. This guy will enter a special state called Gloom Veil State. Here its res will be increased to 120% against everything, so you will deal no damage. What you have to do instead is deal 50 instances of damage to it. After you did this, its res will get back to normal. 50 instances of damage can take a long time, however, lunar reaction damage counts as 6 hits, so if you play lunar-bloom or lunar-charged, you should be done with this in no time. Otherwise, fast application is useful. Burning is one option, units like Xingqiu or Yelan are another way. You can also use some weapons to your advantage. The passive effects of Crescent Pike or Skyward Blade will grant you extra hits, which do count for the 50 hits that you have to deal. You can give Skyward Blade to your Ayaka or Skirk as one example. Hyperbloom should also work. However, there is one additional mechanic to this boss. After it took 50 instances of damage, it will gain immunity to the element it took the most damage from. So you cannot just play spam attack with your DPS all the time, otherwise this enemy will be immune against them. If you deal mostly lunar reaction damage though, this immunity will not happen. Also, it will not happen if you deal mostly physical damage, but who are we kidding, that's not an option. Also, the amount of hits to the boss do not affect the immunity, meaning you could technically hit it 49 times with cryo, but if your one pyro attack did more damage than the 49 cryo ones, it will gain immunity to pyro. It's about the damage numbers, not the number of hits. In addition to that, not only will the enemy gain immunity to that element, but also permanent application. This is what makes this boss so interesting. So far, if you can play lunar-bloom or lunar-charged, do it. It will be so much easier as you can skip most of its mechanics this way. If you don't have that option, you can then be creative and use the permanent elemental application to your advantage. One example would be to play 2 DPSs. Similar to the Rune Drake in the last Stygian Onslaught, you can simply use your weaker damage dealer to deal 50 hits to the enemy and apply their element to it, and then go ham with your other carry. You can play Ayaka for example for the 50 hits, maybe with Xingqiu, and then, once the boss is down and has the cryo aura, melt every hit with Mavuika. You can also play Burn Melt with Mavuika. You apply Dendro, then Pyro, and give the burning aura to the boss. Then you build your Sitlali or any other cryo for damage and have big nuke hits of cryo to give the cryo aura to it again. The same works with Mualani Vape. Deal pyro damage and then you have easy vapes in the second phase of this fight. If you want to use burning though, Emily, for example, might actually not be the ideal choice because she will simply deal too much damage, and instead of a pyro aura, you will then get a Dendro one, which will not help your Mualani. A similar effect will happen in Hyperbloom if you are not careful. I recommend to go for a Hydro aura and only use your Dendro and Electro abilities once you have filled up the 50 hit bar. Plus, if you cannot defeat the boss in time and it enters the Gloom Veil state a second time, you will then have to make sure that your abilities will expire in time, otherwise your Dendro or Electro damage will override your Hydro and the Hero will end up being immune to either Dendro or Electro, which is basically a reset. With some trial and error though, you will be able to figure it out. This boss allows you to be creative, which I kinda like, but the free pass with lunar reactions is a bit unfair in my opinion. Anyway, that's all on this one. 12-2-2. The Mountain King. Same as always, apply pyro to its balls, know when it spins, that's it. 12-3-1. The Wild Hunt is waiting here in 2 waves of 1 enemy each, but the second one is the tankier and more difficult one for sure. This boss only has 2.16 million HP, however, it will not die once you depleted its health bar. Instead, it will enter the so-called grief-stricken state, and after a while it will recover to max HP. This is indicated by this grey area on its HP bar. The red part is the enemy's actual HP, and the grey area has to fill the entire HP bar before it actually dies. So how do you do that? Well, that is another not cry shill mechanic, meaning the max HP of this Wild Hunt member will be reduced by 65 or 90% of the damage taken, depending on whether your party is in Ascendant Gleam, which means you have 2 or more Not Cry characters in your party. Since Aino is the only free unit from Not Cry, this effectively means if you pulled for one of the recent 5 stars, you will have an easier time. But don't worry, you will be able to defeat this boss either way. Once the boss is in the grief-stricken state, you just have to keep dealing damage to it. If you are in Ascending Gleam, it will take 90% of the damage you deal, if not only 65%. Try to deal as much damage to it as possible, because after it leaves the grief-stricken state, it will heal up by the red HP bar that is left. So you might have to do that more than just once. In addition to that, if you are in Ascending Gleam, the enemy will directly enter the grief-stricken state, which makes it even easier to defeat. The good news is, even if you don't have any 5-star from Not Cry, the Wild Hunt is not resistant against anything, so you can play whatever to defeat it. One additional tip. If you're not in Ascendant Gleam, try to save your damage abilities to when the enemy is about to enter the grief-stricken state, meaning when its HP bar is almost empty. In that case, you can reduce its max HP right away by quite a lot before its red HP bar is back again. And lastly, 12-3-2. The Natlan mech is not that big of a challenge, but note that if you are in Naito state, this boss will accumulate 15% energy, and once it reaches 170%, it will shoot its laser attack and then be weakened after. But even with regular resistance, you should be able to deal with it, especially with some Reshred in your party. The main boss is the Bishop. This time it is the Cryo version, which does not matter too much, but the boss will have slightly higher resistance against Cryo, and its elemental attacks will also be Cryo. When the enemy is entering battle, it will have over 200% resistance, so that is not the best time to attack it. However, the best thing you can do against this boss is to bring a shielder. When the Bishop is about to use its primordial shower attack, make sure that you are protected by a shield to counter that attack. If you do so, the boss will take damage, and its resistances are reduced to 0% against Geo, minus 20% against physical and cryo, and minus 40% against everything else. This will only be the case for 5 seconds, so make sure to make most of it. Also, if your shield is of the same element as the shower attack, in this case cryo, or it is a Geo shield, the counter will be even more effective. Bayona, Layla, Sidlali, Noel, Zhongli, and even Lanyan can be very strong here, as Lanyan could also absorb the cryo element in theory. However, if you do not have any of these units built, any shield is a good option and will do against this enemy, so just use whatever you have. And with that, we are done for today. These are all my tips and tricks to tackle the new Spiral Abyss. Overall, I think especially the second half is very doable and allows you to play many teams. The first side though is very chill and really favors Not Cry characters. Sure, you can find your ways around the mechanics, but if you have not pulled for any of the recent 5 stars, you will definitely have a much harder time. However, don't feel forced to wish for any of the new units if you don't really want them, since the amount of primos you spend on them is way more than the amount of primos you will get back from 1 or 2 extra stars. If you have any more questions regarding team building, rotations, etc., feel free to ask me in the comments down below. Also, if you like this video, please leave a like or even subscribe to my channel. I really appreciate your support. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!